All right. Well, this from the Epic Times quote: retired Army officer says he was barred from publicly recognizing woke policies that are harming recruitment. The Pentagon is aware of how progressive policies are contributing to the U.S. Army's falling short of its recruiting goals, but those on the inside are prohibited from publicly acknowledging this, according to a recently retired Army major. More than a year after replying on behalf of the U.S. Army Recruiting Command, today's guest was responding to an inquiry from the Epoch Times about the Army's recruitment struggles. Retired Major Charles Chase Spears reached out again not long ago, and Mr. Spears wanted to share an unbridled explanation of the state of recruiting in the U.S. Army, which finished 2023 with 55,000 new recruits, significantly short of the 65,000 recruit goal that it had aimed for in the fiscal year. He was barred from speaking about these issues, but Mr. Spears said that he was disappointed and frustrated. He often wondered whether there was an ulterior motive for denying him the ability to share the information. Mr. Spears and his family had planned for him to fulfill a 30-year career like many of us do, but in October of 2022, he chose to retire after 2 decades of service. Well, he's now a doctoral candidate at Kansas State University, and his dissertation is studying the reality of the military as a political entity. Former U.S. Army Recruiting Command spokesman and retired Major Chase Spears is also a signatory of the Declaration of Military Accountability and is my guest today. Chase, welcome to the Rob Maness Show, sir.
Hey, thanks so much, Colonel. I'm really excited about being with you today.
Yeah, I'm really excited too. You know, that video was not a new video. That was some time ago, before the end of the pandemic. So all last year, we heard from Army and DoD and other service leadership. Well, we have a problem with the amount of people qualified in the population that's limiting us from getting adequate numbers of recruits and reaching the goals that our all volunteer force set. That really has not had a previous problem reaching these kind of goals at this level. I mean, it might be one service or another, but all 4 services were struggling last year. I think the Marine Corps eventually met its goal, but the other services did not, Chase. And when I learned about your experience as the Recruiting Command spokesman, I really wanted to talk to you because, all we've heard is denial, denial, denial when those of us that have served especially bring up the fact that wokeism, what some people call wokeism, critical race theory, diversity, equity, inclusion, those kinds of policies are really hurting recruiting out there. But you weren't allowed to talk about that kind of stuff, were you?
Unfortunately, not. You've seen it. I've seen it. Many of our fellow Americans have seen it. The fact of the matter is that policy has an impact on whether people want to join the services or not. You as a veteran, I as a veteran, we understand that when we join, we literally place our lives in people's hands. We literally raise our right hands and say that we are willing, at potential sacrifice of our lives, to carry out the policies of the United States, hopefully for the benefit of our national security, for our national safety, for our national sovereignty. And when you see now 3 consecutive years of major recruiting shortfalls, we're not talking missing it by 500 here, 1,000 there, significant shortfalls to the point that the force is actively planning how are they going to shrink, what units are going to go away to cope with this, and to continue to deny that there's a political element to this. It's just absolute madness when it's so obvious to so many other people.
Yeah, it is madness. So you haven't been out of the Army that long. What were folks on the ground talking about in your circles? I mean, obviously you were in Recruiting Command, so you had to be listening to what the non-commissioned officers and the recruits, the accessions were saying about this issue, and probably those that chose not to come in too. I would imagine you'd get data and information among conversations about that. What were you hearing?
It was not a surprise. It was not a secret that one of the many concerns, one of the many reasons that young people had for an apprehension to want to join in the current climate was the reality of the current policies that we are under, was the reality of the current preferences of the chain of command when it comes to political and social issues. This is not a surprise to anyone in the military. The data is out there. The Secretary of Defense himself attends the annual Reagan National Defense Summit. And for the last 2 years, that has been one of the key indicators coming out in their survey of military trust, of showing a precipitous drop in trust. And we're talking drops in trust that are the steepest we have seen since the Vietnam era. We are on a historical scale here. They see that data. They're briefed on that data. They are aware of that data. But the talking points that we were to push out were to absolutely ignore that portion of it. Now, I don't deny that the recruiting issue is a complex issue, that there are a lot of factors at play. I don't deny that there are economic factors at play. I don't deny the fact that there's a worker shortage play. There are all these other things that are put out as part of these statements that are true. And I'm not denying that by any means. But to deny the fact that there is a political element, well, that's the elephant in the room. And my contention when I was on the press desk with Recruiting Command was the best way to make the elephant in the room go away is to acknowledge the elephant in the room. Say, we understand that some people have these concerns. We acknowledge some people have these concerns. And then talk about, but we are going to do our best at the local unit level to take care of your soldiers and acknowledge it. But when you don't acknowledge the elephant in the room, you just give it more power. And that was the argument I made, but it was a failed attempt over and over again.
And there's a lot of elephants in the room that the leadership, all the way down to the squad leader level, are being told not to acknowledge. And that erodes trust both within the force and outside the force, because these young soldiers, they talk to their parents and their aunts and uncles, brothers and sisters, and their families talk to each other. Well, let's go over to our live audience and take a question from them. We like to engage with our live audience over on X Spaces, and our hostesses are Kat and Shell. Kat, you guys got a question over there?
Yeah, you knew I'd have a question. Major, I got a question for you since you just recently separated from the military. Am I right that I have read in some articles that they are talking about reducing recruiting standards where like mental disorders are concerned? And I'm thinking, if that is true, what could possibly go wrong with that scenario? But I'd read an article that said they were going to, people that had some certain types of I don't even know what you want to call it, a mental disorder. I mean, whatever it is, anxiety, whatever it is, could still be considered for military recruitment. Is that true?
I have read similar articles myself. Now being on the outside, I'm not privy to any of the internal documents related to that, but I've read that same report. I'm familiar with it. I have no reason to doubt it. At the end of the day, the military has a set number that they have to get to. They are told by Congress, this is your force structure, get to that number. And they're going to drill and dig wherever they have to drill and dig to get those people. We remember back during the Vietnam era, the saying was go to war or go to jail. I know when I enlisted 20 years ago, there were a couple of folks in my basic training class. It was basically their choice, go to war or go to jail. And during my time, my last couple of years in the Army, especially my time at Recruiting Command, I saw the new academy that was stood up out there at Fort Jackson, South Carolina, to give soldiers 90 days to come up to academic standards, to come to physical standards. So the bottom line is that as you find fewer and fewer people willing to join, you have to go to levels of the population that you otherwise would not have. So it definitely concerns me as a veteran, as a stakeholder in the institution, as someone who loves the Army, as someone who's an American citizen. It concerns me a lot to think, are we willing to let people who have mental disorders come in and receive military training and put weapons in their hands and trust that everything is going to turn out right? That's a risk I certainly hope we as a nation are not in the need to take.
Yeah, that's one of my concerns with the whole transgender issue.
Hmm.
It's not unusual, as you've pointed out, Chase, that we have requirements that you have to meet to be qualified to serve. We have blanket requirements that apply across the board, whether you're a man, woman, or whatever, and not being on medications that tax the logistics system, being susceptible to anxiety, being susceptible to mental breakdowns, and those kinds of things is something that you have to be able to be qualified is what it should be, and that's why I don't believe that those folks should be qualified no more than anybody that's too old or too young or overweight, you know, and those kind of things. So if you're having to take these psychotropic medications, etc., and then expect to be deployed into a combat zone, especially if you're in the trigger puller category or the bomb dropper category, where you have to be stable, physically and mentally. Uh, uh, that should be a disqualifying thing, and I think a lot of parents see that this administration is doing the opposite, and as a matter of fact, is promoting transgender theory and transgender policies that will put their kids at risk, and I think they identify that.
It's not the institution that I joined. The institution that I left, I retired 4 months ago, is absolutely a different military than the one I joined. To your point, to enlist, there were certain medical checks that I had to do. I had to be at a certain body weight. I had to be able to demonstrate a certain physical proficiency. I had to demonstrate that I did not require any prescription medications at the time because we
Well, we've got to take
expect
a
a
break, and
healthy
we'll,
force.
we'll, we'll talk more about that on the backside of the break. And we'll hear from a out of touch chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, last chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, General Mark Milley, Chase. But I want to hear more about that after we come back from this break. I'm Brad Maness.